Welcome to True Crime Scholar, where the shadows of truth meet the whispers of mystery. We'll unravel the chilling, the puzzling, and the unforgettable true crime stories that have haunted the pages of history. Prepare yourself for a journey into the darker side of humanity. But remember, not all stories have happy endings. Today, we're diving deep into the world of outlaw biker gangs and the unsolved disappearance of Louis Malou Roy. He was a powerful figure in the Canadian underworld.
Yeah, what's fascinating about this case is how it peels back the layers of organized crime. We see the shifting alliances, the power struggles, and the brutal consequences when someone breaks the code.
Right. Roy was a prominent Hells Angel in Quebec. He had a reputation for wealth, a ruthless climb through the ranks, and a tendency to, let's say, play loose with the rules of the drug trade. We've got court testimonies, investigative reports, even a book by a former mobster. They give us a pretty detailed picture of Roy's life and the events leading up to his disappearance.
It's like piecing together a puzzle, though, because these sources sometimes contradict each other. But that's what makes this so intriguing. By examining those contradictions, we can get closer to the truth of what might have happened.
So to start, Roy wasn't born into the Hells Angels. He began with a smaller but equally violent biker gang called Satan's Guard.
Even back then, his ambition and ruthlessness were on full display. They used violence and intimidation to eliminate rivals. For example, in 1984, they bombed a van targeting a rival gang leader.
That definitely sends a message. It shows how far they were willing to go to control their territory.
Exactly. It sets the stage for the kind of world Roy operated in. This wasn't a game. The stakes were incredibly high.
Now, in 1991, Satan's Guard was absorbed by the Hells Angels, and that's when Roy's ascent really began. He became president of the Trois-Rivières chapter and solidified his position as someone you didn't want to cross.
Yeah, he became incredibly successful in the drug trade, particularly cocaine. He essentially had a monopoly in Trois-Rivières and was generating huge profits selling throughout Quebec. Some even say he was the wealthiest Hells Angel in the province.
And it's around this time we start to see just how powerful Roy had become. There are accounts of him carrying a booklet, a hit list, essentially, with the names and information of over 50 people he considered undesirable.
That detail is chilling. It wasn't just about business for Roy, it was about control. He had the means and the will to eliminate anyone who posed a threat. He even hired a hitman, Serge Quesnel, who later turned informant and provided details on some of the murders they committed.
Quesnel's testimony, along with other evidence, led to Roy's arrest in 1995 for 3 counts of first-degree murder. But he was acquitted, right?
He was. Quesnel wasn't the most reliable witness, and the prosecution's case crumbled. But instead of diminishing his standing within the Hells Angels, this acquittal seemed to elevate him. In 1995, he became a founding member of the elite Nomad chapter.
For those unfamiliar with the Hells Angels, can you explain what makes the Nomad chapter so elite?
Think of them as the top tier. They operate across Canada, handling the most sensitive operations for the Hells Angels. Only the most trusted and powerful members are invited to join the Nomads. It was a sign that Roy had reached the inner circle.
And this was all happening while the Hells Angels were in a vicious turf war with a rival gang called the Rock Machine, right?
Exactly. This was a dark period in Quebec's underworld. Both sides were battling for control of the drug trade, and the violence was relentless. There's even a story about Roy and another Hells Angel beating up a Rock Machine member while they were all being transported in a prison van together.
That's audacious, to say the least. It shows just how little regard they had for the law. But this is where things take an even darker turn. After Roy's release from prison, 6 men connected to his Trois-Rivières chapter vanished without a trace.
Their disappearances were never officially solved. But there were some troubling details. There were reports of Hells Angels removing belongings from their homes, and their loved ones never heard from them again. It was as if they had been erased.
And then, in the middle of all this, Roy himself survives a hit attempt. A contract killer named Gerald Gallant, hired by the Rock Machine, tried to take him out in 1997.
He was shot but managed to escape. What's interesting is that he refused to cooperate with the police investigation. He stayed true to the biker code of silence, even when he was the victim.
So you have this incredibly powerful and dangerous figure operating in the world of violence and betrayal, and he's seemingly untouchable. But all of this is just the backdrop to the events that ultimately lead to Roy's disappearance. And oddly enough, it seems to revolve around a conflict over cocaine prices.
It might seem strange, but the price of cocaine was a major source of tension within the Hells Angels, and it ultimately played a key role in Roy's fate. Remember, these organizations are built on control and profit.
So how did Roy's actions threaten that control and profit?
The Hells Angels, along with their allies in the Mafia, had a very strict price structure for cocaine. They needed to maintain control of the market to ensure maximum profits. But Roy was known to sell below the established price of $50,000 per kilogram. This angered both the Hells Angels leadership and their Mafia partners.
Undercutting prices like this, wasn't that a huge risk for Roy? What does it tell us about his position within the Hells Angels?
It was a huge risk, and it suggests he was either incredibly confident in his own power or perhaps becoming increasingly reckless. He was challenging the very foundation of the Hells Angels operation. To make matters worse, he refused to join La Table, Maurice Montboucher's inner circle, which further solidified the perception that he was acting independently and challenging Boucher's control.
And Mom Boucher was not someone you wanted to cross.
Absolutely not. He was the head of the Hells Angels of Quebec and notorious for his brutality. He demanded absolute loyalty and obedience. Anyone who stepped out of line faced severe consequences.
That brings us to June 23, 2000. Roy attends a party at Boucher's father's house, a celebration of the Nomad chapter's 5th anniversary, and that's the last anyone sees him.
It's like he vanished into thin air. No witnesses, no body, just gone. But the aftermath of his disappearance might be even more telling than the event itself. Roy's assets were swiftly divided among the other nomads, almost as if he'd never existed. His name was immediately removed from the Hells Angels membership lists.
Was that unusual?
Very. Other Hells Angels who disappeared but were later confirmed to be alive remained on those lists. Journalists who covered the biker gangs extensively took Roy's removal as a clear sign that he was dead.
They were essentially erasing him from history. And then adding to the intrigue, a member of the Rockers, a Hells Angels support club was suddenly promoted to prospect status around the same time Roy vanished.
It's as if they had a vacancy to fill. And perhaps the most perplexing detail of all, Roy's girlfriend, Rosalba Guerrera, never reported him missing. When questioned by police, she basically said she knew the rules of the game and was moving on.
A chilling insight into the mindset of that world. So no body, no official investigation, and those close to Roy remain silent. It's the perfect breeding ground for speculation. What were some of the theories that emerged?
The most persistent theory, the one that really took hold in the underworld, involves a meat processing plant owned by a man named Gerald Maddox.
A meat processing plant. How does that fit into all of this?
Well, according to testimony from a former member of the West End gang, Elias Lekis Roy was taken from Boucher's party to that very plant.
And what happened there?
The story goes that he was bound, gagged, and while still alive, run through a meat grinder.
That's a horrific image. Is there any evidence to corroborate this theory?
It's mostly based on underworld rumors and hearsay. However, there is some corroboration from another source, Andrea Andrew Scopa.
Who was Scopa?
Scopa was a high-ranking member of the Rizzuto crime family, the most powerful mafia organization in Canada. He was murdered in 2019. But before his death, he gave a series of interviews to journalists with the agreement that they would only be published posthumously.
A confession from beyond the grave. What did Scopa have to say about Roy's disappearance?
He confirmed that Roy was killed at the meat processing plant and that the meat grinder story was true.
That's a pretty powerful statement coming from someone so deeply embedded in organized crime.
It is. Sapa even provided some insight into the motive behind Roy's murder. He claimed that Vito Rizzuto, the head of the Rizzuto family, had made a deal with Boucher to eliminate their respective problems.
So a trade-off. What kind of deal are we talking about?
Rizzuto wanted a troublesome capo named Paolo Gervasi out of the picture, and in exchange, he would give Boucher the green light to eliminate Roy. Scappa claimed this arrangement was motivated by Roy's persistent undercutting of cocaine prices, which was hurting the Rizzuto family's profits.
So it all comes back to those cocaine prices. Roy's defiance of the established order ultimately sealed his fate.
It appears so. Scappa's account suggests that Roy's actions in the drug trade ultimately led to his demise, orchestrated by both the Hells Angels and the Mafia. It speaks to the tangled web of alliances and rivalries in organized crime.
But if this theory is true, why go to such extreme lengths? The meat grinder, the complete disappearance, it seems excessive, even for this world.
I think it's about sending a message of absolute power and control. A message that betrayal, no matter how small, will be met with swift and brutal punishment.
They wanted to make an example of Roy, ensure obedience and silence any dissent within the ranks.
Exactly. The gruesome nature of his alleged death and the complete disappearance of his body amplify that message. It creates a culture of fear.
Earlier, we mentioned Roy's car being found abandoned days after he vanished. Doesn't that contradict the idea of a meticulously planned disappearance?
It does seem like a loose end. However, there are a couple of possible explanations. It's possible the car was left as a deliberate diversion or red herring to mislead investigators.
Or perhaps even within this carefully orchestrated plan, there was room for human error. Maybe someone panicked and left the car behind.
It's certainly possible. Even in organized crime, things don't always go according to plan.
This entire case has been a glimpse into a world most of us will never experience. A world where loyalty and betrayal carry life or death consequences. What stands out to you as the most significant aspect of this case?
For me, it's how a single disappearance, the fate of one man, reveals so much about the inner workings of organized crime. We see the violence, the secrecy, the intricate web of alliances and betrayals that define this world.
It's a world shrouded in shadows, but one that undeniably shapes our society. It influences our perceptions of crime, justice, and the very nature of power. We've talked about the theories, the rumors, the possible motives. But what about Louis Roy, the person? Is there more to him than this ruthless image?
There are glimpses of a more complex individual beneath the surface. He was known for his generosity. Some people describe him as almost a Robin Hood figure, giving money to struggling families in his community.
A benevolent gangster. It seems contradictory, but does highlight the blurred lines between good and evil that we often see in these stories.
It certainly does. He was also, by all accounts, a devoted father to his daughter. Despite his lifestyle, he seemed determined to keep her separate from that world.
This duality is something we see in a lot of organized crime figures. This capacity for violence and love makes you wonder, are these inherent traits or are they products of the environment they operate in?
It's a fascinating question, and it makes Roy's disappearance all the more tragic. His daughter was only 12 years old when he vanished.
To grow up never knowing what happened to your father, to live with unanswered questions, and the weight of his legacy must be incredibly difficult.
It reminds us that the impact of organized crime reaches far beyond the immediate victims. The ripples of violence and loss can be felt for generations. So where does this leave us? What can we take away from this story after all these years, all the speculation and unanswered questions?
The truth remains elusive. Roy's body has never been found, and no one has ever been charged with his murder. But while the legal case might be cold, the story of Louis Roy continues to captivate. It provides a stark look at the dark side of society and the potential consequences of operating outside the lines.
Roy's story is a reminder that the world is a complicated place. There are shades of gray even in the darkest corners. The pursuit of power, particularly in the world of organized crime, can be seductive, but also incredibly dangerous.
It seems Louis Roy, despite his wealth and influence, ultimately became a victim of the very system he helped create. Until next time, keep your eyes open and your mind sharp.